Welcome to my photo friends. I'm your host, Joshua. I'm a photographer, and for the past 10 years, I've been involved in the Elgin photographic community. Through those years, I've met dozens of local photographers. Meeting these photographers brings me genuine excitement. You see, photography can be a very individual activity, since there's only one person that presses the shutter button. By getting to know other photographers, I get to learn from their passion and knowledge. By sharing these interviews, I hope any photographer can learn and become a better photographer and artist. But before we begin, I have a few thank yous. First off, thank you to my wife, Sarah. Her wisdom has been essential as I have developed this interview series. She has spent many hours hearing my ideas and providing encouraging feedback. Secondly, thank you to Side Street and their staff for hosting this interview. Side Street's impact on our community cannot be overstated. They provide inclusive access to exhibition, performance, education, and advocacy because art is important. I'm honored, truly honored, and thankful that we are able to use their performance space. Lastly, thank you to Ray, who is managing our recordings. I first met Nick through the Elgin Fringe Festival, where he now serves as artistic director. In addition, he serves as director of programming at Side Street Studio Arts, as well as being a director, actor, producer, podcaster, and improviser. In addition to his other artistic endeavors, Nick is also an avid street photographer. Each time I have heard Nick speak about the arts, I have walked away enthusiastic to pursue my own art. Please welcome Nick as my first photo friend. So let's get this off on the wrong foot.
Oh, good. You started off by interviewing me first, so yeah, you already are. Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about yourself, other than what I just summarized.
All of those things, and also I'm a big traveler, which is, goes hand in hand with my street photography. I was a teacher for 10 years at public schools for high school, at the high school level. Have a degree in graphic design. I don't know. I live in this building, it seems like. So I don't know if that's a thing. Yeah. But I don't know. I think that I always knew, even as a kid, that I'd be involved in the arts and in making things and that kind of stuff. And yeah, so it just seems like it's a natural progression to get here, which is weird to say. Especially if you follow astrology, because I'm a Capricorn, and apparently Capricorns are very, driven individuals, and I am a driven individual, but it's, very driven to go down whatever path I end up going down. Mm-hmm. Instead of, this is my path, I'm going this way. I've allowed myself to veer and go all over the place, which is not a very Capricorn thing, I don't think. But also, I'm not an astrology expert, so...
It could be a Capricorn thing.
Yeah, it could be. I could be completely wrong on that.
So I noticed that a lot of the things that you do end with ER. Have you thought about adding any other ER-related things, like becoming a firefighter?
Oh, yeah. Actually, dishwasher, I think I thought about, mostly because I definitely have the skills for that. Firefighter, not so much.
Oh, okay.
Ladders don't like me.
That's fair.
Yeah.
In all seriousness, so you're involved in many different aspects of the arts. Mm-hmm. How have each of these creative pursuits impacted and benefited each other?
Oh, they all tie together. Like I said, my degree's in graphic design, but that ties into everything. I use design work for my shows, to put together advertising and stuff like that. But also my training in that area has helped me, do better at taking criticism and things like that. Because, you go to art school and they tear you down before they build you up, basically. And though sometimes that's pretty tough, it gives you the opportunity to sit there and be able to learn how to process those critiques and learn what you take from that and whatever. And then, you mentioned improv as well. And that's led me to kind of be more spontaneous and, live by the moment a little bit. And that also leads back to my photography. So, yeah.
Well, and that kind of leads into, the question of improv is all spontaneity. Mm-hmm. And your street photography, I have to imagine that it's spontaneity.
Yeah.
So how do those interplay and learn from each other specifically?
I think the key is just being open-minded, and for me, what harmonizes with those two things is the idea of discovery.
Okay.
It's what brings me joy in both of those things, is that finding that thing, right? That, wow, this just happened, or I just found this, right? It's interesting because I think that's one of the keys to really great street photography, is that spontaneity and that capturing like that moment or that spot, right? It's a funny thing. One of my side gigs is I do graduation photography. So I literally at ceremonies take photos of graduates as they're getting their diplomas and whatever. Okay. And so you get a lot of different photographers, from a lot of different walks of life. And one of my bosses at the company, and he's told me this a couple times. He goes, when I go on a hike, I don't take my camera with me. And he goes, if I see something I like, I'll come back with my camera and set up the shot. And I'm like, it's gone. For me, that's gone, right? That shot is gone as soon as you walk away from it.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of my perspective of it, is if you don't take it right then, if you don't take that photo right then, if you don't say the thing right then in an improv scene, it's gone. It's past.
So what makes you look at a scene? Let's do
there
a
we
little
go.
bit brighter. What makes you look at a scene and think, I want to photograph that? You've mentioned capturing the scene, spontaneity.
I don't know. It's alchemical. You never know. I mean, and if you look through my photos, I don't think there are some trends in my photography, but there isn't like a certain thing that I always take a photo of. It's just whatever calls to me, resonates to me. If it's touching, I think this specific photo that we're looking at it was a touching moment, and the light was perfect in it, but sometimes it's something that makes me laugh, or it's something that I'm just like, wow, blows me away. It's when I'm walking around, if something gives me pause, I take a moment and go, is this a photograph? Sometimes it's not. Sometimes it is. And then I take the photo. I take 2 or 3 photos right there, usually. It's weird walking around and finding these things. And sometimes, like you're walking up to something, you're like, oh, this is going to be something. And sometimes you literally just like screech to a halt. Mm-hmm. And sometimes you turn around for a second and you see something behind you, right? That's another thing that a lot of people forget to do when they walk around with a camera, is to look behind you or look up or look down, and there's a lot of magic all over the place.
Yeah. So recently I've had several conversations with other artists about what makes a person an artist. But I want to kind of ask you a different but similar question of, when everyone has a camera, what makes a person a photographer?
It's kind of a loaded question. And I'm sure lots of people will give you different answers to that.
That's why I'm asking.
Yeah. My response would be, are they taking a photo? Then they're a photographer. And I think that's my belief when it comes to any art, right? You said, what makes an artist? I'm like, the making of art. We're all artists in that sense, right? And that doesn't speak to quality or level of ability, or if they're a professional photographer or not, or whatever. But yeah, if you're taking a photo, even if it's your phone, you're a photographer. And that's great. That's beautiful. And, it's weird because with the influx of smartphones and the high quality cameras that they have, it makes taking certain aspects of photography, it makes those certain aspects easier. And so the quality of photos we're seeing as a whole, as a people, have gone up. But there's so much more to photography. And so there are people that are worried that smartphones are killing photography. And I'm like, no, it's just changing it. We as photographers use the tools that we have. Like when Kodak brought out like the Brownie cameras originally, I'm sure people were like, well, "This is terrible. We don't have to wait 15 minutes to take a photo." Like it is what it is. It changes, and if more people are taking photos and enjoying taking photos, great.
Okay. So I just put this one up because I think it's cute. How does your lack of control over street photography impact that creative process? And I want to add a little addendum on there in how much we photographers that spend, all day and night, sweating over it, we call it post-processing.
Sure.
But how much computer work do you do? Or is that even part of the joy process?
It is part of the joy process. So that spontaneity, that like lack of control is a beautiful thing, right? It's interesting because I always tell people when I take photos, about a third of them I even process, right? I go through, I mark the ones I like and process those ones. So I take a lot of photos, and I have no problem with that. I think that's one of the great things about having digital cameras now is that you can, right?
Yeah.
I mean, when I was in college, they still had us using film photos, and you'd get 24 to 32 shots per roll, and then you were done. And so you did have to sweat over that, right?
Yeah.
Whereas, for like this shot, I probably took, probably 9 photos, if I'm guessing, within that same thing. Probably 2 or 3 of that exact, like not exact, but close to that composition. Probably a couple of the girl in the background in focus and the boy in the foreground in focus. Probably a wider shot of it. And I have that luxury now. And so I'm going to use it. But also, I think what helps me control that unknown factor is composition, right? And that, I guess, goes back to my graphic design days. Whereas I'm a composition monster. I want things lined up the right way. I want, to make sure that the things that I want to emphasize are in. I usually shoot in the thirds, so in the right or the left third, that kind of thing, and really try to focus in. And I've also picked up little things like I heard somebody say during a talk once that they had a professor that just told them if it's not important in the photo, then you shouldn't have it in the photo, right? Stuff like that. And also thinking about composition as I'm looking at something is a challenge because we as humans have binocular vision and we have amazing, the ability to see all over, right? I just lost the word for it and I feel really dumb. Peripheral vision, thank you. We have great peripheral vision. A camera doesn't, right? You have that rectangle. And so for me, visualizing what that photo is going to look like as I'm standing there and taking it in helps a lot. When it comes to post, when it comes to processing, generally I don't do a lot. I'm a contrast monster. I like a contrasty photo, so I usually up my contrast a good amount. But I adjust the exposure, highlights and midtones a little bit, but I don't do anything too crazy. Sometimes in darker situations like the previous photo, I might push it a little bit more. Now that I got a new camera a couple years ago, I can actually push dark photos a little bit more than I could before, and so I tend to do that a bit. But I don't know. I like... People say I want the photo to be what I see. I don't think it's that. I think I want the photo to be what I envision when I'm there. And so that's usually pretty close to what I've taken as a photo. To be fair, though, I've also, during phases been like, I'm going to underexpose this so much or completely wash it out with an overexposure and just see what happens, right?
Everybody goes through their heavy vignette phase.
Yeah. And there's nothing wrong with that. And if you find magic in that, that's great too. But yeah, for me, I don't process a lot. I don't shoot in, HDR, which I mean, hey, if you like HDR, that's great. It's not my thing. I want something a little bit more, I don't know, organic feeling.
Okay. You and I are both old enough. Everyone in this room is old enough.
Wow, that's an assumption.
We're all old enough to remember when a poster or a flyer was the most effective way to advertise an event. Now artists and creators have so many options for getting the word out, building a fan base. At first we had websites, blogging, then we had social media, and now it feels like if you don't have Facebook or Instagram, that you're operating with a handicap. So how has internet, social media, maybe Facebook and Instagram in particular, impacted the artist and that creative process?
For me personally, I don't know. It's a weird thing. I have an Instagram. I have a Facebook. I've tried other, even some photography-based social media. I don't know. I tend to just put my photos on Facebook and let people like them if they like them. It's not. There's so much grind and so much else that I do that I think for this specifically, I kind of let it be what it is. That being said, I think if you're looking to sell and be active, you have to be on social media and you have to grind it out and do all the things. And I do that with so much else, with my improv and my acting stuff. Like we go crazy with social media. We do ads, we make videos to sell stuff, like to sell tickets and stuff like that. But we also still do posters and flyers. And honestly, it depends on what your audience is. If you're looking for local people, when you're on Facebook or Instagram, it's a massive pool of people, and getting to the right people is hard. Whereas if you're here in Elgin and you put up a poster at the public house, it's going to be people from Elgin walking into the public house seeing that poster.
Yeah.
So I think even though there is a huge place for social media now, that other part of it still matters and exists.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how about the impact of, we'll call it the algorithm, impacting the direction of art? Have you noticed that in I realize your street photography is, a little bit more of a personal affair.
Yeah.
But for those public creative processes.
Yeah, no, for sure. And both to benefit and detriment, right? I'm a TikToker. I love TikTok. I will watch too many TikTok videos every night before I go to sleep. And you see both sides of it through that, right? There are some creators that I found on TikTok that are amazing. Actually, a lot of ceramicists, really great ceramicists on TikTok. But then you'll see other stuff where it's like, this is, and I don't want to poo-poo on anyone's art processes, but there are things where you're like, okay, everybody's doing that. Like, it's not anything unique or whatever. And that stuff bombards you because people do try to go, this is what people are watching, so I'm going to make this thing.
Yeah.
And the algorithms go, oh, you're into art, here's this, and this is interesting and cool, but then also, here's this that everybody seems to be liking, even though it's just that same thing that everybody's doing. And so, I don't know, I don't think it's hard to say it's changed the level, I should say it hasn't changed the ratio of good to bad that I'm taking in. It's just meant that I'm getting more of both, I think.
Yeah. Okay. Disclaimer, before I show the next photo. All of these photos were submitted by Nick when he knew that they were going to be shown publicly.
Yes.
So, as an artist, how do you deal with negative feedback?
So for people that aren't here watching and seeing this, it is a pumpkin on a stoop, and it's, instead of being carved as a jack-o'-lantern, it says "Boo, you whore."
That'll be my first bleep in this series. That's great.
Thank you. I'm glad I'm your first. It's funny. How do I take criticism? I appreciate criticism. Like I said earlier, I went to art school and got plenty of criticism then, mostly well-deserved, but not always. And so I take it in and I listen to it and I process it, and I've gotten to a good place where I don't take it personally. And a lot of that comes both from art school, but also from writing. I'm also a writer. I write theatrical things and comedy and sketches, and I will have friends who will just be like, that's not funny. And when you tell somebody something's not funny that they put time and effort into, most people break down. They're like, whoa. And for me, it's like, okay, then I'll either fix it or move on, right? So I've gotten to that point where I don't take that criticism personally 90% of the time. I mean, there's always going to be kind of hurt feelings once in a while when there's just something you're like, I was in love with that.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I think it's important to be able to take that criticism, but also be able to filter criticism as well, right? Because even if somebody is an expert or, the most brilliant artist in that field, their perspective is different than yours. What they would do is different than what you would do. And so, it's important to look at that criticism, reflect on it, and go, is it valid for what I'm trying to do? Is it valid for what I'm doing? And if not, then throw it out the window, right? It's okay to ignore a criticism if you feel like it doesn't match up to what you're trying to do. Just throwing out all criticism because criticism is folly, though. So it is one of those things where you just have to learn to filter the right things through.
And kind of the inverse of that is I've watched enough performances to know at the end of a performance to not have somebody applaud is like super rare.
Yeah.
But there are lots of performances where everybody applauds because it's completed.
Yes.
Instead of because it was excellent.
Oh, that happens most of the time I get up on stage. It's fine.
And I feel like social media has brought out the worst version of that. The
Sure.
ability to instantly like anyone's photo.
Okay.
And then for the creator to pursue likes. How do you deal with that empty validation of, the likes, the thumbs up, the hearts, the applause at the end of the show?
Well, most of the people that are looking at my photos are people I know. And so I kind of know when they're just liking to like at this point, and which ones are like, oh, I like this photo and I like this photo. Also, as an actor, you can tell when an audience is just placating you and they're clapping as well, because if it's bad. Before they know that this is terrible. What have I done? I regret every choice I've made in my life up until this point. I am so sorry, audience. And then they clap and you're like, no, don't clap. Go home. Put on The Bear or something else that's good, because this is not. But yeah, I don't know. I think, obviously it's nice to get likes. It's nice when people share things and go, oh, look at this thing that somebody did. But for me, and this is a really selfish thought process on it, but I don't know. I make stuff because it makes me feel good, right? I do a good show. Yes, I want the audience feedback. I want the audience to enjoy it. But also, I want that because it makes me feel good. It makes me feel good when I have a good performance. It makes me feel good when I find this stupid pumpkin in New Orleans just walking down the street, right? It makes me feel good. And when I share it, if it makes somebody else feel good, great. And if they don't like it, then okay, that's fine, because I still like it. And it feels good.
To make you feel good, that made me laugh.
It made me laugh, and it made the person I was walking around with laugh as well.
It also made me cringe at the thought of showing it in public on my laptop.
Right. Well,
But-
apparently it's a line from the show White Lotus.
Oh, okay.
And
yeah.
I've never seen it, and I was laughing hysterically. And Amanda, who I was with, who's also another photographer, we travel and walk around and shoot together a lot. She goes, "You've never even watched The White Lotus, have you?" And I'm like, "I don't know what you're talking about." And she's like, "It's something Jennifer Coolidge said." I'm like, "I don't care. It's hilarious. I'm loving it."
All right, we've got two last photos that I thought maybe you could give us a little bit of commentary on.
Sure.
Tell us a little bit about it. So first of all, we have what I call the scary puppet.
Yeah, I love this photo. I'm in a weird thing right now where I really love like windows, like storefront windows and stuff like that, and things right behind the glass where you get the reflection kind of creating a layer of something there. Sometimes it doesn't matter what it is. Sometimes it's just there for a textural thing. And sometimes that reflection matters. But this was an interesting photo. It was in North Carolina, in this tiny little town. We were just driving through North Carolina and stopped for lunch. And we had parked right outside of this Serta store that was closed, Serta mattresses. And they had a giant Serta sheep in the window. And it was so dark behind it. And I'm just looking at it, I'm like, this is the creepiest thing I have ever seen. And I'm like, for a place that's supposed to be like, oh, have a nice, comfortable, easy sleep, this haunts me, right? And so I had to get it in that, like, the big smile and all of it. And I don't know, it's disturbing in the right ways for me. And I love that photo. And
it looks like it might have bodies buried in the basement.
oh, for sure. It's the John Wayne Gacy of sleep demons. Yeah.
All right. And then...
This is another reflection. This was taken the same day as the first photo.
Okay.
So this was in Ohio, in a town called Geneva on the Lake, which is this weird little microcosm of, like, back in the day, right? It's got, like, an old, like, boardwalky feel. Like, there's an old skee ball arcade and weird stuff. And it was so cool. And I walked by, and the clouds had rolled in. Like, there had been storms in and out, like rain. And just texturally, this one got me, right? Obviously, the old the carousel horse, and was really cool, and it makes a great kind of focal point. But just all of the cloud texture and the light, and the fact that it's right around sunset, so you're getting a little bit of that orange purple into it as well, like, really worked for me. And it's weird because I am more of a modernist in the way I like things. I like, having just a very clear thing and not a lot going on around it. But this one works for me, even though it has so much going on around it. And I think those things are all great little elements to it.
It's got a great mood to it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's weird. It's weird in that same kind of, like, dreamlike quality, which I was really happy to discover when I did it.
Yeah. Any questions from you guys?
Yeah.
Thoughts, anything?
Yeah.
When you're out on the street and you're going to take a picture, how do you deal with the people who are going to be in your photograph?
If there are people in like in the first one,
Ask if it's okay.
not normally. Not
So
normally.
Let me repeat the question.
Yeah, sure.
So if you're out on the street,
Yeah.
how do you deal with the people that are in your photograph? Do you ask for permission?
Not normally. I don't. And it's a tough line, and it's a hard thing. Like, and some people will argue that you should, and some people will say, well, if you do, then you lose the moment. I don't. Honestly, I didn't start taking photographs of people while walking around until just a couple years ago. Like, I was afraid of it, right? Because you're like, they're gonna kill me. They're gonna see me and I'm taking their photo, and they're gonna be like, get over here, I'm gonna punch you. But I kind of let go of that because, like, that moment with the older couple sitting on the bench was so beautiful, right? And also, I try not to take ones that it's, like, necessarily like, this is just a person, right? Like, there's more to it than just them. They're obviously the focal point, but there's more going on in that photo, and we don't really see their faces very well there, if at all, which makes me feel a little bit better about that as well. But there's that, and I also say that I think if you're going to take photos of people on the street, they can't be exploitative, right? You can't be exploiting them, right? I think this is a beautiful setting. It's, and so I think that's okay. If it was, and I actually had a moment where a person confronted me because they thought I was doing that. An unhoused person in Niagara Falls, Canada, came up to me and was like, "Hey, stop taking photos." And I'm like, I'm not taking photos of any people right now. I'm just taking photos of these things I'm seeing. And we had a long discussion about it because he was very upset about that. And he's like, other people will steal your camera for that. I'm like, I get it. I'm not taking your photos. And I wouldn't have, because that's a little bit different, right? But it's a weird line, and it's a kind of a juggling act when it comes to taking photos of people you don't know. What's also weird is, for the first time during this same trip, I had multiple people ask to have their photo taken. Like, oh, you're a photographer? Can you take our photo? I'm like, okay.
And you're like, actually, I'm not a photographer.
Yeah,
I
no.
just take pictures.
I tell them I'm a private eye, and if they're cheating, on their spouse, I'll take their photo, and that's about it. I think also, yeah. I mean, people are gonna let you know if they don't want their photo taken. Interestingly enough, I almost put a different photo in here. I try to take photos from different trips or days or whatever. I know I had a couple that were the same day, but one of the other ones, because we did a photo walk here from Side Street that you were on, and one of the photos I took on the way back was a guy pulling like a dumpster out of the back there behind Al's Cafe, and like there was just a photo I was taking, and he saw me and just starts waving at the camera, like smiling and waving, and I'm like, this is great. Didn't make the cut, but it was one of my options because a lot of times they're like, yeah, take my photo. They love it.
I feel like smartphones have made people much more comfortable with that in a public setting, where they understand that if you're in a public venue, walking down the sidewalk, you're going to end up in somebody's photo. There's somebody doing a selfie or a TikTok or a whatever.
Yeah.
So
yeah. Either that or the NSA's getting them, whatever.
We assumed that since the 80s.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's true.
Any other questions?
You had said that you're looking like, that's not a picture. Have you ever taken one that you said it's not a picture and said that's a picture?
Oh yeah, sure.
And then what made you determine that it's not a picture whereas when you first saw it?
It's one of those things. Sometimes it's that need to make it work. You asked earlier about processing afterwards on the computer. One of the things I will do if I think I need to is I'll adjust a crop, right? And sometimes it's that. Sometimes it's a photo. You're like, this doesn't work. I loved the subject. The moment was so great, but it just doesn't work as a photo. And then I take it into Photoshop. I edit it in Photoshop, and I crop it a different way. And all of a sudden, it's like, wow, it's there, right? But my instincts are usually pretty good because I'll take that photo, even though I'm like, it's probably not going to work out. But when I say that it's not a good photo, like it's not a photo, I'm pretty sure I'm right. Obviously, I can't say I'm right because I didn't take the photo, so I could be completely wrong, but it feels like I'm right. And a lot of the times it's because there's too much going on. I like more urban settings because as much as I love nature gets in the way of itself when it comes to taking photos. And so, like, all of a sudden you're like walking down a path and you're like, this is a beautiful thing. And you take a photo and it's just all the beautiful things and you just can't see the thing you're trying to convey. And so, yeah, forest for the trees, literally, there. But yeah, sometimes you can pull it out, and it is very satisfying when that happens.
Do you find, sorry, it's a piggyback to this.
Sure.
Do you find sometimes it depends on, like, you're in it that day, and then you look at it and you're like, oh, this is crap, and then a week later you come back to it and you're like, oh, it's right there, I just gotta crop that out, or...
Sometimes, but also, and this is another weird thing, because I know not everybody is like that. I want to process my photos immediately. I'm very much, and I don't know if it's because the further away from it I am, the harder it is for me to remember what I was seeing. But for some reason, I am very much like, okay, I took these photos today, I'm going home, putting the SD card in my computer, and I'm hammering them out, right? And that's, I don't know, that's just the way I do it. And some people, like the person I travel with, like, she doesn't do that. She'll go a month before putting any photos out, and she'll be like, I don't know, I just wasn't there yet, you know? I'm like, okay, I can't do that. I gotta get it out of me.
Yeah, my question is very similar to the previous one. I was going to ask how much is intentional versus accidental in some of your shots. The one of the pumpkin,
Sure.
okay, I noticed that one of the things I really like about it is you just got a few colors in there. It's very linear and it's very almost abstract in its composition. And I was wondering how much when you do something like that, is it intentional or you just have a good eye and a feel for it that it ends up coming out that way?
It's all good eye.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's just the best,
Just
the best of
oozes
eyes.
out of him.
Actually, I have a third eye that's really good. No, that one specifically is was determining my composition. Like it was intentional, right? Even the angle I shot the pumpkin at, right, with that where it's slightly like turned away from the pumpkin, because it definitely helped create those lines. And I mean, obviously, I can't choose the colors that are going to show up in my background because I'm not setting the photo, but I was aware of those. That being said, there's lots of serendipitous things happening in photos when you're walking around. A great example, and this is weird, a couple years ago I was in New Orleans, and I go to New Orleans every year, so you'll hear me mention that a few times, but I was walking down the street, and there was just this guy like facing out towards the street, and like a broken window, or like one of those big door windows that they have in New Orleans, and it was broken in an interesting way, and I just really liked the composition, and so I took the photo, and then after even after I processed it, I didn't even notice until afterwards that what the guy was doing in the photo was looking at somebody that was not in the shot, and he was grabbing himself, and I didn't even see that, because I was so focused on the composition of the door window and him, and there was this whole other layer to the photo that I missed. And when I saw it, I was like, what? It blew my mind.
And you didn't submit that one.
No, so that was from a few years ago. All of these have been within the last year.
Oh, okay. So if it would have been from the last year, you would have submitted
I
that
may
one.
have. I considered it. It was on the short list at one point. But it was such a wild thing. Like, and there is that discovery afterwards that I'm like, oh, there was this other thing here. That one was pretty obvious, and I should have probably caught that. But it was such a weird moment in time that I captured that I didn't even realize I had captured.
Wondering when you were talking about post-processing and just getting to the point where it's something you source. One of the things I think about, and sometimes I try to achieve in post-processing, is I'm more interested in trying to convey what I felt as opposed to what I saw. And in some respects, I might make edits that actually are almost like a romanticized sort of version of the setting. That's what I want to. Takes me back to that spot and what I want to try and convey to other people.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point, and I do that a bit. I'm really into darker settings now and how light pools and that kind of a thing. And honestly, part of that was I finally got a camera that can handle some darker settings. Before I really couldn't do that, and I wanted to. And so I've been playing with that a lot, and I definitely will tweak my processing to kind of go along that lines of that pooling light and that mood that you can get from that. And I think that's fine, because I think that's part of the experience, right? If that's what you're experiencing in that moment, then that makes sense to go into what the photo ends up being. Of course, also, if you don't want to do it that way, that's also cool too. I'm not telling anybody how to make their own art.
Yeah.
So a follow-up question to some of the earlier ones. So street photography, are the times where you visited a location, you're like, okay, this would be really interesting, but I need to come back at a different time, different light. Maybe it'll be busier, maybe it'll be quieter, where you're actually planning a shoot.
I generally don't. I know other people do, and that's okay. The closest I would get to that is because I go to New Orleans very regularly. Like, there are places that I've shot multiple times at different times, and I know kind of like, oh, I did this time, but I kind of want I'm finding a different feel that way.
Like different weather.
Yeah, different. Well,
Less crowded.
and I think for me, it's more like fate lets that happen for me, right? Whether it's busy or crowded, or if it's cloudy or storming or whatever, I kind of let fate happen that way. Also, I'm one of those people that like does a bunch of stuff when I travel, and so like I don't have time to go, okay, I'm gonna go here, and then if I want to come back again tomorrow and shoot it at this time, I can. Like, I'm over here now. I'm over at this place at this point, and for me, that's okay, right? And I think that goes back to the improv of it, right? It's about the moment, and just once that moment's gone in improv, it's past. You move on, right? Improvisers talk about, I don't remember shows. A lot of them were like, I don't remember shows. It happened and then went on. It was fun, and now I'm moving on to the next fun thing. And for me, that's kind of how I work photography-wise. I will know that I want to go to certain things, and I'll think about when I'm going to go to those things, but I don't really go back. I don't really go, okay, this was cool. Let me go back and at this time with this, setup. And I also I don't like having too much control with this. And I know I talked to you about this a little bit when we did the photo walk. I shoot with a prime lens. I shoot with most of my photographs that are in this were shot with a 35 millimeter prime lens, because I don't want that control, right? I'm taking an element out of it, out of my control, and so that I can focus more on the things that I am controlling, right? And so it kind of goes along that line too of I'm letting those things go, right? And I think that's a healthy thing, because if we have to worry about every single element and every single detail, then we never pull the trigger, right? I have friends both in art, in visual arts, but also in performing arts and writing and stuff that are very much oh, it's got to be perfect. I'm like, yeah, but if you're waiting for it to be perfect, it's never going to happen, right? And so, for me, it's about that. It's about going, okay, this is what happened. If either the photo turned out great or it didn't turn out great or whatever, I'm gonna move on now. And I know that's very different than some people. It's very different than Claude Monet painting haystacks for a week. Geez, that guy was nuts. But I couldn't do that. I couldn't do that. I don't know if that just might be me. I'm maybe not built that way.
Yeah, and I'll respond to your question. I will frequently go on a first trip and be disappointed with the images. And I think everybody here knows that I take many trips to Chicago, and I'll go back to roughly the same area with a different artistic idea. Not necessarily I shot that building and I want to shoot it a different way, but now that I've been through that neighborhood, I have a better idea of what I might look for, and I feel a little bit more inspired because I have a little bit of the groundwork built. And that's kind of what I wonder if happens in New Orleans.
Yeah,
visiting yearly.
Definitely. I don't know if I'm consciously trying to do something different when I go back, but there is a weird way of discovering through familiarity.
Yeah.
I'll be walking through, the quarter and walking down, let's say Royal, whatever, it doesn't matter what street it is in the quarter, that I've walked down a million times, right? And I'll walk around a puddle or look down at a point or whatever in a way that I had never done before, and all of a sudden I'm like, this is a thing. I've never seen this before, even though I've been here this many times, right? So that can happen, and sometimes going through those, allowing yourself to be open, even in familiar areas, helps that. I've walked around downtown Elgin who knows how many times, right? But when we took the photo walk, when I took this photo, that was the first time I saw that photo, was when I took it then, and I think it's just being open to discovery, even when you're in something as home-like as, where you're at all the time.
Yeah.
Curious, do you ever experiment with things like long exposure, in terms of camera blur, other things like that for your street photography?
I did for a bit. Long exposure is a little bit harder just because I pack light, right? I don't carry a tripod with me. If I bring an extra lens, I feel like I'm weighted down, And so taking a long exposure, I'm always, as much as I talk about letting go, I get real annoyed by just camera jitter, right? And so doing a long exposure is hard in that settings. I've tried it. I've tried playing with different things, intentionally blurry things. I think there's a lot there. It was kind of like when I mentioned, talking about overexposing, underexposing earlier. Like I definitely experimented with that stuff for a while. And who knows, maybe I will again. But right now I'm kind of in a phase where I'm like, I don't know. I don't need to explore the more scientific side of the photography. In that sense, the mechanical side, the process that way. For me right now, it's more just about the moments and the things. And sometimes I can enhance those things for sure, but I'm not really at a phase where I'm doing that.
Is there a location or city that you haven't been yet that you're like, oh, I would love to go there because
Gosh.
blank?
Probably St. Charles.
Yes, very much. No, I've actually done some photography in St. Charles. Shocking. I would say Tokyo. Actually, a lot of like East Asian cities, Tokyo, Seoul, those kind of cities, where there's you get a lot more neon lights and a lot of things happening on the street. And at night, there's a lot more activity in that in open spaces. And I don't know, I see some street photography from Asia in some of these Asian metropolises that are just gorgeous. And I get jealous about that. I'm like, these are beautiful. Like, I want to go to this street. I want to go eat some food at this stand and just sit here and take in the people passing by. So yeah, I guess that's the big one for me, at least from what I've seen in my small worldview. Those are places that I'm like, that's cool.
Related to that, do you ever not take a picture so you can just be in the moment?
Sure. I would say, probably a good chunk of time I don't take my camera with me. Sometimes I just won't take my camera with me when I'm at a place. Not like on the trip, right? But like that day, I'll just I'm leaving my camera. And I'm just doing these things. And that's great. And I think if we talk about my street photography, a lot of it is just me bringing my camera along with me when I'm traveling. Because that's the thing that I really enjoy, is just finding new places and discovering them. And it's not just through a lens, but a lot of it is also, through my mouth or through my ears or whatever, or through my mouth with a lot of liquid. But yeah, my camera doesn't come, it's not glued to me. And I think that's important, because I think if it becomes like my main focus, then that's when I start to resent it a little bit, I think, right? Because I'm like, yeah, today I'm taking photos. And if I take 90 to 150 photos today, that's great. If I take 5 photos today, that's okay as well, right? If I take 0 photos today, that's okay. I just got back from Denver a couple weeks ago. We were there for a performance thing, but we only took our cameras out one day. We drove over to Red Rocks and walked around there and took photos. But the rest of the time, we didn't have our cameras with us, and I mean, we still had a blast. We still had fun, and it was great. And I don't feel like I missed out on anything, right? Because I mean, yeah, when you're sharing your photos, you're sharing those moments in your life that have happened, those moments that you've experienced, but you don't have to share all your moments. Sometimes your moments are just yours.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, this was wonderful. Thanks for being my guinea pig, as it were.
Oh yeah, I'm just glad I got to go before Doug.
I think we can all agree that he does qualify as a photographer.
Oh gosh, in every level of that word, yes.
So to plug it for the recording, there are 5 more interviews. 2 of the victims, interviewees, are actually present here tonight.
Nice.
So hopefully you'll be able to join us for a few of the extra ones.
I hope so.
Thank you.
Yeah.